Hey guys, today I want to take a look at the 2022 midterms, so the Senate and House of Representatives elections in 2022. Currently, the Democrats are favored to win the Senate by a pretty narrow margin here. On the betting odds, you have the Democratic Party retaining control of their very slight majority with 50 seats in the vice presidency. So the Democratic Party at 54 cents to the Republicans at 46, and it's pretty much stayed this way for quite a while, unless you look back to before the election, so before the runoffs on the 5th of January. If the Republicans had held on to just even one seat with Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, if those two candidates on the Democratic Party had lost those races, the Republicans would be very, very strong coming in to the 2022 midterms. However, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler did not win their respective races, and so that is why, their chances plummeted after that, because the Democratic Party does control the majority now, and all they need to do is not lose any seats, and they'll retain their majority of the United States Senate. As for the House of Representatives, the Republicans the clear favorite here at 59 cents a share to 42 for the Democratic Party. It was pretty clear right after the 2020 election, where the Democrats lost a huge amount of seats. They were expected to gain or just not lose seats at all, but the Republicans, their chances had slipped after they lost those Georgia Senate races, and it's essentially stayed in the high 50s, low 60s for quite a while now since those runoffs. However, if you take a look at the 2020 Senate results, it was pretty devastating for the Democratic Party, especially when Joe Biden had just won the presidency and they took the Senate. But in the House here, the Democrats lost 13 seats. The Republicans gained 14. Not a single Republican lost a seat in 2020. It was only Democrats that that were forced out of their seats. And so, yeah, you did lose that libertarian afterwards. But Nancy Pelosi, she was elected by a pretty narrow margin to another term as the majority leader, as the Speaker of the House, and this will be her last term as Speaker. Democrats will have to find a new leader for the House after 2022. So before we get any further, make sure you join my Discord server if you have not, the link to which is at the very top of the description below. So I'm going to start off by taking a look at the Senate. The House, it's much harder to predict. Basically every single race rating was completely off for the House. If they actually gave seats to either party, it was basically staying the same, around 235, 36 for the Democratic Party. But as you can see afterwards, they went from 235 down to 222, which is a very, very slim majority. They only had 4 more seats than they needed, and Pelosi was barely able to win her election as the Speaker, because, there are Democratic defectors in there that do not support Pelosi for majority leader at all. So, taking a look at the Senate here, I'm going to start off by filling in these safe Democratic seats. I'm just going to make this pretty quick and just highlight which races are competitive in 2022 and which races will actually determine the outcome of the 2022 Senate races. So although there is a retiring Republican in Missouri, it's going to be solid for them. There's no way that the Democrats are going to win Missouri. Iowa, Chuck Grassley, even though he might retire and is probably going to retire, the Democrats are not going to pick up that seat, nor are they going to win in Ohio with the retirement of Rob Portman. So I'm just not going to, go through all of this. Nevada is looking pretty strong for Catherine Cortez Masto. So I'll leave that there for the Democrats. I don't really see any strong Republican that could challenge her in the state of Nevada. And then for Republicans, they're going to sweep the South, even though this is a retiree in Alabama. It's not going to change the dynamic of the race, nor are Republicans going to lose Florida. That is just not going to happen, or South Carolina. So this puts the Democrats and the Republicans pretty much even at 47 seats each. So the reason why I left New Hampshire here is because Maggie Hassan is running for re-election, and if she faces any Republican but Kristen Noonoo, I have no doubt that she's going to win. But if she faces Kristen Noonoo, who's the popular governor of New Hampshire, the popular Republican governor of New Hampshire, Vermont and New Hampshire both have Republican governors. If Kristen Noonoo runs, he has a very, very good chance of winning. He is very popular in the state. It's like Maryland, where Larry Hogan is the Republican governor, even though it's by far a Democratic state. New Hampshire is less of a Democratic state, but Joe Biden won this state by 7% on the presidential level, and Jean Shaheen won her Senate race here in 2020 by over 15 points. But Maggie Hassan is the weaker candidate compared to Jean Shaheen, and if Chris Sununu runs in a year that is expected to favor the Republican Party as the popular Republican governor, that could really turn out to be pretty bad for Senator Hassan, but we'll see what happens there. But right now, let me give it to the Democrats just because Chris Sununu has not announced that he's going to run, but definitely is thinking about it. Arizona, you have the special election winner Mark Kelly. Same thing in Georgia, the special election in Georgia with Raphael Warnock. They both have to defend their seats. If they win their re-elections after 2 years, they will go back to the Senate, and the Democrats will retain control. But that is not the most likely. That's not the most unlikely. They are still favored in their races at this point. If you look at the Cook Political Report, they are both expected to win re-election. They are in the lean Democratic category right now. So I'm gonna put them as that. The Democrats in Arizona and Georgia, these races do favor the Democratic Party, while in Wisconsin, I would say it does favor the Republicans, definitely with Ron Johnson. He will be running for a third term in 2022. He announced in 2016 that he would not be seeking another term after that, but he has since taken those words back, which is why if he is the Republican incumbent, he will still do pretty well here, in my opinion, because if you do look at the presidential map, yes, it is true that this is a Biden state. The Democratic Party did win Wisconsin, flip it back, but look at the margin. They won it by 0.63%. That is not enough, for me to say in any sense that they're just going to win this state by a huge margin. And on the local level, on the statewide level, politics are much different from the presidential election. So even though Biden won it, if Ron Johnson, the Republican incumbent, does manage to run for re-election, then it's not looking good for the Democrats in Wisconsin. However, where it is looking good is Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania, Biden state by 1.2%. They have a Republican governor, and not Republican governor, they have a Democratic governor. Sorry about that. So Pennsylvania, a Democratic governor there. North Carolina, state that Biden made huge gains in. It went down from 2016's 3.7% margin to 2020's, as you can see, 1.3% margin. So these races are the two most competitive races. I would say right now the Democrats do have an advantage in both of them because Pennsylvania is just a blue state, and right now the front runner for the Democratic primary there is currently John Fetterman. As you can see, John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor of the state of Pennsylvania, who ran alongside John Wolf in 2018. Won by 17% of the vote, so it's a pretty strong margin for those two, and he is currently by far the favorite to win the Democratic primary in Pennsylvania. Republicans, it's a lot more split right now, as Pat Toomey is not running for re-election in the state, and then the state of North Carolina, Richard Burr, the retiree, not too much data on who's going to replace him, but on the Republican side, you do have Laura Trump, the wife of Eric Trump, who is seeking the seat there in North Carolina. I think that if Laura Trump does run, I do think that she would do worse than other Republicans in the state. So these two races are really the toss-ups at this point. They're going to make or break the race for both the Democrats and the Republicans. Whether or not Republicans can make gains really depends on these two races, as well as New Hampshire at this point. Which if Chris Sununu runs, this is definitely a toss-up. It is no longer likely or safe for the Democratic Party. And these two seats, Democrats have to watch out for, just like Republicans have to watch out for Wisconsin. So something else I do want to take a look at is the polls that have come out for the 2022 midterms. If you look at this is what is called the generic congressional ballot. Basically, people are asked whether or not they would vote for the Democrats or the Republicans if it's just a generic Democrat or a generic Republican. This is something that the Democrats have been leading in for a while now. If you look at the 2020 polls for the generic congressional ballot, as you can see, one day before the election, they were destroying all of these polls. But typically, the party that does not control government or controls less of government does typically do better in these polls. So right now, the Democrats do seem to be doing better. And if you look right when, this is right after the election, late November, early December, the Republicans were leading in the generic congressional ballot. But after Joe Biden's taken office, things have changed quite a bit. The Democrats are now leading in most polls after the swearing in of President Biden. And so that I think is definitely a very good thing for the Democrats that are leading, especially when it's a race that they are poised to lose, because the odds are not for them right now in the midterms, because Joe Biden is the president and Democrats control basically the entire government right now. And if you look back at 2020, as you can see here, the Democrats plus 6.8 in the polls, and they won only by 3.1% in the generic congressional vote in 2020. And of course, this does benefit the Republicans in almost every single way. Almost every single time, Republicans are underpolled, which is why they always do better than what this says. But typically, the Democrats do typically always do better. The Democrats do better than Republicans do better. So, in a good year for the Democrats, they do better than Republicans do in a good year for them. In 2018, we saw a similar story, except this was the only time in a pretty long time where the Democrats actually did better than the polls. This was a shock. The Democrats were able to retake the House, winning, I believe, 50 seats, a huge turnaround for them in 2018. Democrats 7.3% in the polls, 8.4%. But what you have to remember is that the Republicans were able to win a seat in the Senate. They were able to expand their Senate majority. So although the Democrats won the House, they did still do even worse in the Senate, despite winning the generic congressional vote by 8.4%. And then finally, looking back at 2016, this was the only time that the Republicans had actually done pretty good here in the last couple of years. Plus 1.1%, Democrats were still pulling ahead, but the final polls did show Republicans in the lead. This was when they were able to do pretty well in the House of Representatives. So, so the polling data right now is looking pretty average for the Democratic Party. They average at around 6% right now, 5-6%. It's lower than their numbers, or it's higher than their numbers in 2020, but it's polling under than their numbers from 2020. So the polls right now, they're looking pretty average for the Democratic Party. I think the Senate level is looking much better for them than the presidential level, of course. And then I do also want to take a look at Joe Biden's performance. That is something that's very important for midterms. Whether or not the president is approved of has a huge effect on the results of these midterm races, especially 2 years after the presidency. So Joe Biden's approval is pretty high right now, 54.3, 39.9, much higher than Donald Trump's. If we compare his to Trump has never been popular throughout his presidency than Joe Biden is right now. A majority of Americans have never, ever approved of President Donald Trump. Disapproval rating Joe Biden is lower than Donald Trump's, but compared to other presidents in the past, of course, Joe Biden's is higher, because at this point, Republicans are basically just an automatic disapprove for the president. But Biden is doing all right compared to Bush right now, all right compared to Clinton, compared to George Bush Sr. is not doing as well. Reagan is actually the most comparable to Biden's approval at this point in time. So if you look at that green line, it's pretty average, but considering just how polarized politics is now, it's a pretty good approval rating. Definitely something I think Joe Biden should be happy about. And if you look at actually his approval rating on the coronavirus, it is much, much better. Right here, this is Joe Biden's approval for his handling of COVID-19, which right now is at plus 30.3%. 61% of Americans approve of the job that Biden is doing with handling the coronavirus. And as for Donald Trump, it was basically the exact opposite. I mean, more people disapproved of Donald Trump than disapprove of Joe Biden's handling of the virus. His disapproval was at 57% when he left office. It was really only high at the very beginning of the pandemic, because when America is in crisis, they do typically tend to like their leader a little bit more, but that was definitely not the case for Donald Trump after, just a couple of weeks, because he really did nothing about the virus. He was very ineffective. His whole team, they had no plan for anything. So Biden's approval definitely much, much higher, and I think this is very good. I think if the Democrats, with the leadership of Joe Biden, and Democrats in general, because they do control the government, if COVID-19 can basically be ended by 2022, by the midterms, if life can go back to essentially normal, that is very good for the Democrats, because that would really make people want to vote for them, because the Republicans basically did nothing about it, and they voted no on bills that 70% of the country do support. This is Joe Biden's approval of his response by party. So 92% of Democrats approve of Biden's handling, 58% of independents. So most independents are on Biden's side, 30% of Republicans, which is still pretty high. I mean, 30% of Republicans is a lot of people. And then for Donald Trump, only 70% of his own party at the end approved of his handling of the coronavirus. Even at the, even at his height there, we saw only the mid 80s. For independents, definitely he was in the minority if he supported Trump as an independent on his response at around 36%. Democrats, only 8.9% of the opposite party compared to Biden's 30.5%. And then this is how worried people are about infection. Something else that's pretty interesting right now. Very is pretty high. Somewhat is also higher, but since Biden took office, the very has gone down. But really not too much of a change. But the vaccines are getting distributed now. And then how worried are Americans about the economy? You saw a huge spike with the very in early March. And then as Biden has taken office, it's lowered a little bit, but really not that much. Not too much of a change for how Americans are worried about the economy and infection as a result of COVID-19, but Americans do typically approve of Joe Biden's response much, much better than they approve of the response that Donald Trump gave. And I think this is a huge factor in the 2022 midterms. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it. Comment down below who you think will win the midterms, Democrats, Republicans in the House and the Senate. Subscribe to my channel if you have not. Join my Discord server if you haven't. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.